Welcome to Fast to Heal Stories. Esther, we are so delighted to have you here. I feel like we can never get enough people on to talk about menopause and perimenopause and all of the hormones and all of the things. And I always love having a fellow registered dietitian. And I know you're an integrative dietitian, as I am. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about over the next hour. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Shauna. I know I too, when I saw you're a dietitian, I was like, yeah, right. Because yes, it's, to functional dietitians, we're like the unicorns of,
Right?
of regular dietitians, it's a real niche.
It
Real
is.
specialty.
It is. And I wasn't even sure there was an integrative dietitian thing until, it's like, that's what I've been practicing, but I didn't know that it was an actual
Yes.
label up until pretty recently. So, yeah, very excited to have you here. So I would imagine a lot of my listeners have already heard of you because you have a whole slew of books that you have out in print. And your most recent book is See You Later, Ovulator. And I love the title of that. And that just came out a few weeks ago, October 4th. So congratulations
Thank you.
on all of those publications. We'll definitely talk more about that book in particular. But please tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you came to be an integrative dietitian, like you said, the unicorn of the dietitian world, and where you got to, how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So I came from a family of physicians, nurses, pharmacists, you name it. So my grandfather was the tonsil king of Brooklyn, Harry Blum. And he took my tonsils out in his operating room in his house in Brooklyn, which had an OR. And then my grandmother, his second wife, was a dietitian, and he trained her to be the anesthesiologist. So she put the ether mask over my face, and Nanny and Poppy took my tonsils out. And, nothing strange about that. And, my father was a dermatologist, mother was a nurse. So I really loved science, but did not want to go to medical school. And my grandfather was like, what do you mean you're not going to go to be a doctor? You're not going to be a success. You're not going to make any money. I was like, oh, you watch me, young man, because I sure am going to show you. So I became a dietitian, and I couldn't have been more happy because it's basically pre-med minus physics. Hello, I stunk at physics. Yeah. Cried through the chemistry. It's definitely a little bit less chemistry. It's like a couple semesters less than med school. But other than that, I loved it. And got my first job out of college working at WIC at Boston City Hospital, which was, federally funded program for women, infants, and children, supplemental food for people who are economically disadvantaged. So that was a great learning experience. And then I went back to grad school, went to NYU, got my master's, and worked in hospitals in New York City the first 5 years. I worked at Beth Israel and worked in the cardiology units. And I was like, gee, I only have 10 minutes to instruct someone on a diet. They're supposed to follow the rest of their life. And I have no follow-up with them in an outpatient clinic. And so, what impact am I really making? And there were some doctors that were really wonderful and receptive to nutrition, but the majority, I may as well have been a fly in their ear that they wanted to just flick away, couldn't have cared less. And I was like, wow, this is really kind of not satisfying. And so I realized, I went to a cocktail party at my parents, and I met this wonderful woman who was like, what do you know about supplements? I was like, nothing, because in my grad school course at the time called Vitamins and Minerals, they said, you don't need supplements. Everything's in your food. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. There goes 50 grand of my life. So she said, I know about this amazing functional medicine course and nutrition. And I took it, and I was furious because I was like, where is all this info? I have 2 degrees in clinical nutrition. Where the heck is any of this info? So I left the hospital after and, worked for a functional doctor, opened my own practice, and the rest is history, and then started writing books. But, it's hugely disappointing. And medical school and a traditional ADA, a dietitian degree, is really woefully lacking in, so many more studies and so much research. It's a very conservative, antiquated curriculum. All you have to do is open the Journal of the Dietetic Association. You see ads for canola and soybean oil and processed crap. So I'm actually not a member of the Dietetic Association.
Nor am I.
Yeah.
I'm like,
no.
I refuse to give money to that membership. I just can't do it. I never have. I'm like, no. And even every time the 5-year comes up where I have to renew the registered dietitian credential, I'm just like, oh. And this last time that I had to renew it, I just focused all on integrative and functional. And there was some literature and some like fasting and insulin resistance and focusing on that with there was a few courses that I was able to to do a lot of education there. But I hear you. I can't even, the only reason I look at the journals at this point is just to see what kind of the nonsense that is spewed in there. And I know we're not here to bash the dietetics field, but I've been asked in a lot of interviews, like, where do you think the disconnect is? Because I feel like the curriculum, it's like you learn the biochemistry, you learn the nutrition, you learn like physiology, and that's just, it is what it is. And then I feel like it's when you get into the field in your internship and those steps, like that's where everything falls apart, because then you're basically just learning from other dietitians who have been so ingrained in the system for so long. But
yeah, I'll tell you, well, I had a really enlightening, I'll put enlightening in quotes, enlightening conversation with a colleague of mine he was a medical intern and resident when I was a dietitian there. He went to family practice, and I asked him recently, what's the deal? Why isn't nutrition even paid attention to by doctors? Because how many times have we been gaslit by doctors? Even the clients I see, I'm sure you see, they're like, oh, I have colitis and I went to my GI and they said, oh, diet has nothing to do with it. So I said, what is the deal? Come on, it's 2022. And he said, well, there's no valid studies on nutrition, on nutrients. And I said, are you kidding me, dude? There's a whole field of medicine called functional medicine. Oh, what's that? Hello. So, and he said, well, nope, there's still no good studies done on nutrients, and it will never be part of the medical school curriculum. And I was just at a conference this past weekend. And, one of my dear friends is Mark Houston. For those of you who don't know, he is one of 5 integrative cardiologists. He is so ridiculously brilliant. And he went into functional medicine years ago, and he gets snubbed by his colleagues all the time when he publishes papers, and they all give him a really hard time. And I said to him, do you think they're going to change the medical school curriculum? He was like, never. They're never going to change it. And, the good thing is medicine and nutrition is a business like any other. So if you don't like your dietitian, if you don't like your doctor, find another one who's in functional medicine, because let me tell you, there is tons of research. I put this research in the back of my books, and it's how I practice, run a very brisk practice with a long waiting list of people who are like, I need to find a better practitioner. I need to do better. And they're just gaslit and horribly underserved. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to gaslight you. I'll serve you and actually help you get your health back. And I don't care what the doctors say. I'm not sitting waiting around for the perfectly designed research study out there to come out. There's more than enough out there to justify the way you and I practice.
For sure. Yeah, there's way too much money to be made in pharmaceuticals and big food for anything to change anytime soon. Like the things that we teach people that it's not going to make anybody any money. So, but yeah, we just have to keep doing what we're doing. And honestly, it's like, I feel very targeted in certain platforms, especially like I've had my Instagram account shut down twice. And I'm like, well, that when it was growing like crazy was when it got first hacked and then deleted. I'm like, well, I think that there's something behind that. Like, somebody doesn't like what I am teaching and somebody doesn't like that I'm getting results for my students that have nothing to do with anybody making any money on the side. So yeah, it's pretty hopeless, I feel like right now, but people are wising up, and the more people we get out there like you and I feel like, hopefully the tides will start to turn a little bit. But yeah, let's talk about your most recent book and how that came to be. And then we'll just talk a little bit. A lot of the listeners are either, approaching perimenopause, in perimenopause, or just getting to that menopause stage, or there and after. So why did you focus on those topics? Well, why don't we take a step back and just kind of define like what perimenopause and menopause are, and then why you decided, I really need to get some word out about and some messaging out to women for this topic.
So the symptoms are basically the same from perimenopause to menopause. The difference is menopause is 12 consecutive months without a period. So let's say that you're in perimenopause, you skip a period for like 8 months, 11 months, then you get a period again, you have to restart the countdown clock. Boo-hoo. Sorry, ladies. but the symptoms are the same, menorrhage, like extreme irritability. You get that muffin top, or the muffin top turns into a cake top. You can't fit into your clothes. You lose your libido, hot flashes, brain fog, depression, anxiety, all of those, fatigue, all of those can come with the territory of perimenopause, which is when progesterone starts to decline and estrogen can vary 30% on any given day, up and down.
That's huge.
Huge. So I decided to write about it because there are very few books on menopause. I don't always agree with the ones out there. I'm going to be really transparent and say, or they're so amazing, but so clinically written that there's nothing for the layperson, or a lot of them talk about the lifestyle changes in perimenopause, but still women were not given the tools. I was like, oh my God, what a gorgeous opportunity to educate women on the exact testing they need, self-advocacy at the doctor's office, current research on the recommendations for hormone replenishment, what diet to follow, what supplements you can take. So giving women a complete leg up and just opening, the curtains on my practice and really saying, this is exactly how I treat people in practice. Because it's a formula that works, and it is not an overnight formula, but it involves me doing testing, working on diet and supplements, and then bringing in a practitioner to prescribe hormones if needed and indicated. So it's really about building a team of support, women who have, or men too, if they're men or physicians, but a team of people who have your back throughout the process. So you have structure, you have accountability, and you have a customized plan to meet your unique needs through the process.
Yeah, because we're all so bio-individual, and following hormones and replenishing those is definitely a big, huge piece of the puzzle. But without the correct testing, it's like, well, how do you even know where to start? And maybe you fit some of those symptoms, but what works for one person is certainly not going to work for the next person. But I would love to talk a little bit about a few of those symptoms, because people just aren't really understanding it or equating the symptoms back to hormone levels, and in particular, like bloating and brain fog, or, just your memory not working the same. And some of the things make sense. Like, oh, we're going to get like heavier periods or lighter periods, or we're not going to have our period as often. Like those make sense. But it's like, when you think about like, all of a sudden I'm getting bloated in my 40s and I'm having food sensitivities to things that I never had. Like my gut was always fine, and all of a sudden you are. Or it's like you walk out of a store and you're like, I can't even remember what side of the parking lot I parked on, let alone where my car is. Like, how do those relate? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's mostly due to falling estrogen levels with the bloating and the brain fog. But why do those occur? And it's just, we just don't even think to connect the dots to those two things. Like, but in particular, like bloating and brain fog, can you walk us through why that happens as we go through perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah. So, well, estrogen, people don't realize how vital estrogen and progesterone are to gut health. They maintain the integrity of the gut wall. We even have a subset of bacteria called the estrobolome that are responsible in particular for metabolizing estrogen through the gut wall. One of the reasons why I do the hormone and gut testing I do is to make sure that you are detoxing your hormones through phase 1 and 2 in the liver and phase 3 in the gut. So declining estrogen and progesterone can cause a decrease in the production of hydrochloric acid, which leads to a lot of bloating. And also, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone play a huge role in cognition and forming new memories and neuroplasticity and, being able to string a sentence of words together. And also declining progesterone can cause a tremendous amount of insomnia or really poor sleep or really interrupted sleep, which will also give you brain fog and bloat. So it's kind of the trifecta of an S storm that's really going to cause a lot of these issues. The good news is it's really reversible. We don't have to succumb to this, which was another reason why I was like, I'm going to write this book and teach women, the specific roadmap to reverse these symptoms and to keep everything in check. There's a lot you can do to heal up your gut that involves, cleaning out any dysbiosis or bacterial overgrowth that should not be there, healing inflammation in the gut, getting in protein-rich foods and bone broths and slippery mucilaginous herbs that you can buy, a slippery elm and aloe and okra. And there's lots and lots of herbs that can really heal that inflamed gut wall. And then also starting to take digestive enzymes. So you absorb your nutrients, you keep that pyloric sphincter closed. You're not getting reflux while it's just flapping open all night. That alone really helps work on the bloat. And then the lifestyle pieces too, right? Like getting good sleep, having sleep hygiene where you're not on the phone the minute until you go to bed. You quietly read a book, shutting down. You're not watching Dahmer and trying to go.
They're obsessed with that.
Oh, yeah. You couldn't pay me to watch anything. The only thing I can tolerate is like Ted Lasso. I need quiet, calm, and happy.
Yes.
I cannot tolerate. Oh my God. But yeah, not drinking too much booze or caffeine, because you're also going to find that your clearance and tolerance to those are very, decline usually for most people and are very sleep disruptive. So it's all the basic things, meditation, it's like you're forced to take care of yourself at this point in time. You can't avoid it. The worse you take care of yourself, the worse you'll feel in perimenopause. It's nature's way of saying, please stop, start saying no to things, take some things off your plate. It's really okay. This is your time, baby. It's your time.
It's so true. I mean, I've never been able to tolerate much alcohol in particular, but I even drink like one girly seltzer in the afternoon and my heart rate is elevated into the night and I get crappy sleep scores on my Aura ring. And it's like, oh my God, I haven't been like drunk and I don't even know how long, but even just one alcoholic drink is enough to raise my heart rate. And, and I just don't feel the same the next day. But would you say that's true? So I'm just curious to ask, because as you were talking about the lower estrogen and the memory, my daughter, who's only 19, was diagnosed with PCOS over the summer, which floored both of us, because here I am like the insulin expert and the insulin resistance. And she's been doing so many things that we were floored when she had very high levels of testosterone and very low progesterone and estrogen. But when she went away to college, she didn't get her period for 4 months. She got very terrible acne. And we're like, gosh, we can't figure this out. We sent her special water. She was eliminating inflammatory foods. And it was just like her lifestyle just triggered it. She's going to bed late. So anyway, I'm curious. She has told me a couple times, like, I feel like my memory is just tanked, Mom. Like, I don't remember things like I used to. And when she first told me that, I'm like, well, you have a lot on your plate, like you're adjusting to college life, you have a different schedule. But now that I think about it, her estrogen was very low. So I would imagine this can affect women of younger childbearing years as well, if their hormones are out of whack, and in particular PCOS, which is typically lower progesterone and usually at least low progesterone, not always low estrogen, and then high testosterone. Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I had a 29-year-old go through menopause in my practice. So it can, but there's a lot you can do with PCOS and low progesterone. And this works for perimenopause too. Certainly chaste tree is a nice herb that helps get a more robust production of progesterone. And, stress management too. We don't realize that hormones are driven from the top down. So what happens in the brain affects our whole feedback system for sure.
Yeah.
And then, a good fatty, almost like a fertility diet, caviar, fresh eggs, organ meat, red meat, butter, avocados, nuts, coconut oil, like the fats are precursors to hormonal production as well. Lots of zinc, right? And zinc is red meat and oysters. So all of those can be very beneficial in supporting the body.
Yeah, I would say she does well on those, but maybe not the caviar.
Yeah, I know. It's a little expensive too.
And
I
she's
know.
on a bunch of supplements to help with that as well. But where would you say women, and I'm sure you walk through this in your book, but where would you say women should start with testing? I know for my daughter, we did the Dutch test, and we've talked about that on the podcast before, the dry urine testing. Would you say that's a good place to start? Where do you start with your clients? They're like just wonked out and struggling.
Yeah. And I just want to add for PCOS, myo-inositol, if you're not already on it, that's, know, the drill. Okay. So where do I start? I start with comprehensive blood test. I look at all 7 thyroid tests. I look at insulin, fasting insulin, glucose, A1C. I will look at your inflammatory markers, lipoprotein little a, CRP. I look at triglycerides, cholesterol, and vitamin D, magnesium, B12, folate. So those are just general good starting points. I mean, they're comprehensive panels. I'm just pulling out a few, but they're all listed in the book for sure. And then I do the Dutch, and I do the Dutch complete because that has an organic acids test attached to it. So I can really get a good look into your brain biochemistry, your melatonin production. This is helpful for sleep, anxiety, and depression. And what really doesn't get talked about during perimenopause and menopause are the mental health changes women go through, and they're just left fending for themselves. And, they like the sweetest humans I'm speaking to, and who want to come in the practice, and they're like trying to just keep up this face, but inside they're crumbling. I'm like, this really isn't you. And they say, oh my God, I'm so irritable, and my family laughs it off. But, that's never a good feeling, to feel out of control with irritability. So I really like to look as far under the hood as I can at that, so I can be the most supportive and get women on the nutrients and or hormones they need. And of course, the Dutch also looks at detox pathways. So that's really important. And then the GI map is also wonderful. And I do the test with zonulin, so I can look and see, do you have a leaky gut? Are you digesting and absorbing your nutrients? Are you even making digestive enzymes? Do you have any pathogens or parasites that shouldn't be there? Are you low in beneficial bacteria? So I really try to optimize one's gut health, because that can be the key to what the term I just learned at my conference was inflammaging. So I love that. Isn't that fascinating? I have to give credit to Dr. Todd Lapine, who works with Mark Hyman. He gave a whole talk on inflammaging. I was like, Todd, I'm going to steal that. but it's really a cascade of inflammation, autoimmune conditions, hormone support, because phase 3 of hormone detox goes on in the gut wall. So if your estrobolome is not functioning properly, you get an elevated enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. And if that's high, you're going to keep reabsorbing estrogen in the gut and not excreting it, pooping it out the way you're supposed to. You may think, oh, that's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. Number one, if you have a history of hormone-dependent cancers in your family, it's problematic. Number two, if you decide one day to start taking hormone replenishment, you're going to feel worse if you're not cleaning it out every day. So it's not the cure. The hormones are not the cure. They're a piece of the pie. And these tests I run are kind of a system of checks and balances to make sure that what comes in goes out, that your ratios of hormones are healthy to each other. And also you want your gut to be healthy because you want to absorb your nutrients. If you're eating well and taking supplements, if you're just peeing them out, that's not going to really help you either. And, just as a side note, I keep talking about this conference I went to because it's so fresh in my mind, but, stealth infections like COVID, Lyme, Epstein-Barr, anything in the herpes virus family, shingles and all that, your ability to respond and stave off the effect that these all have in your body is highly dependent on your gut function and the integrity of your gut. So it's really important that the better off your gut is going into perimenopause and menopause, the better your transition will be, the better your longevity will be, your ability to fight chronic illnesses. That's all really, really important.
Yeah.
And talking to a girl who's like Lyme, Epstein-Barr, mold exposure, COVID, perimenopause, all of it. And I'm like, oh, my gut is definitely, still a work in progress after being treated for all these things. So it's something I continuously work on. And
I was just gonna say, I think you've gone through a lot of those things yourself. Those viruses, my gosh, they can change things and linger and replicate, and you think they're gone and they're just lying dormant. And we've seen that with my own son. And going back to, I know you mentioned ulcerative colitis, but one of my sons struggles with that. And he had not had symptoms in years, got COVID, kicked everything back up, and was in a flare within days. And, just we had to kind of go back to square one for a while, and he's doing very well now, but it's crazy how those things can, just keep manifesting once you are living with them. But I'd love to go back to one thing you said about the Dutch test, the organic acids test. I know that's part of the Dutch test, but I don't think we've ever talked about that in the podcast before. If you just give a real quick overview of what that is. So I know it's we can throw those terms around a little bit, oh yeah, we do the organic acids. It's can you explain what that is and what we're looking for with those tests?
Yeah, well, you're looking for nutrient deficiencies and neurotransmitter imbalances. So it really checks for B6, B12 deficiencies, glutathione deficiencies. And glutathione is not only the liver's most important antioxidant, but so important for COVID and long COVID. You can actually make it into a nebulizer and inhale it if you're still having chronic lung inflammation. For me, I couldn't get through Lyme treatment without it. But if you're also on hormone replacement, you should be on glutathione. So really, really important. Also looks at your production of dopamine and serotonin, which are happy, calming neurotransmitters in the brain. It looks at your melatonin production as well. And that's important too, because melatonin is, it's a solid antioxidant. Been around for millions of years, and it's fairly easy to correct a deficiency. Number one is have people improve their sleep hygiene, get away from phones and screens at night. And if I have to be on my phone, my glasses have blue light blockers in them. but also keeping your phone on like the darkest possible setting. So it's just so super dim is also really helpful. And then, dimming the lights at night in your room, not having these really bright lights. Try to get the old-fashioned light bulbs because the LEDs are a lot of blue light, and other light bulbs are much softer. Yeah, traditional. I don't know if my husband always teases me. He's like,
mine too.
you're an analog girl in an LED world, right? Or what's the term for the old-fashioned light bulb? He says you're an incandescent girl in an LED world. Because I'm like, no, I want my old light bulbs. And he's like, they're gonna go out one day. I'm like, no. So, really lifestyle is key to, you may not actually be deficient in melatonin. It's just that if you're exposing yourself to all this blue light all the time, it's going to shut down your melatonin production. Sleeping in a really dark room. I mean, I know this all seems so basic, but I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference. Like, all you need to know is if you've ever traveled in, a cheaper hotel versus like a fancier hotel, like the blackout shades make all the difference in a good night's sleep versus not. But melatonin's really easy to supplement with too. I mean, geez, you can get them over the counter anywhere. And there are patches. There's you can take it liposomally under the tongue. So all of those are important, because if you don't have them, if you're deficient in any of those nutrients, you're not going to detox your hormones well. You're not going to sleep well, and you can really struggle with brain focus and depression and anxiety as well.
Yeah, I recently ordered some blue blocking glasses for at night. Oh, my kids and my husband make such fun. I don't wear glasses other than that.
Yeah.
And they're like, how do you even see? Because they're orange. They're like, how do you even see through those? I'm like, hey, it's been a long time, like months to years, where I just hate bright lights at night. And my husband, like, we have dimmers in our bathroom, and I have it like on the lowest setting to wash up and get ready for bed. And he's like, how do you even see in here? I'm like, fine. Like, don't you dare put that on so bright. Yeah, and, my boys, I don't love them on screens or the Xbox at night. I'm like, well, if you're gonna go play that, you put my blue block class
right,
at least. So it helps. I mean, it helps tremendous. Like you said, everything seems so basic, but it's these basic things that you compile them and you add them up, and makes all the difference for your hormones and your sleep, which is foundational, and the GI health. And I mean, it all adds up. They seem silly, but like you said, it's like we just need to go back to a couple hundred years ago, and things have changed so much that it's hard to mimic that lifestyle anymore.
It is. And it's funny because, my son's 15 and a half when we're recording this, and he gets so irritated because I'm like, get off your phone, man, at night. And and he's like, oh yeah, show me the studies. I'm like, oh, you want to play?
You want to play that game? Yeah.
And I'm like, zoop, 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 like sending him the studies. And he's like, oh, fine. I'm still not getting off my phone.
I know.
But I'm like, don't sleep with it next to your head. Put it out of your room. Yes. Blah, blah.
Airplane mode. I know. My husband, I'm like, we just turn that Wi-Fi off at night, and he thinks I'm absolutely nuts. I'm like, why do we need it on? Let's just turn it off.
That's right.
And I'm like, absolutely don't put that phone by your head.
That's
and of course, my kids say, you're the only parents who make us leave our phones out of our rooms. I'm like, I don't care.
Give them my number. Give them my number. Right. I'll set them straight.
I know a lot of women listening to this, and men too. I shouldn't just say women, but women more so will struggle with that midlife weight gain, and all of a sudden they're doing the same things that they are eating the same foods, doing the same lifestyle, and maybe even doing too intense of exercise. Like they're trying to exercise in their 40s and 50s the same way they did in their 20s and 30s, and wondering why they're seeing some weight gain around the middle. So why are we seeing that as women? Like why, I know that has to do with estrogen too, and there's estrogen receptors in the abdomen region, but what can we do about, like, let's just talk about that midlife weight gain and what we can do about that.
There's a few, there's diet. I call them my Meno laws for fat loss. The first is optimizing your protein intake, because most people I see, I'm sure you see this too in your practice, Shauna, like they're just not optimizing their protein. And people say, well, how much protein do I need? It's really a gram per pound of your ideal body weight. So let's say you're 5'4", your ideal body weight's 120, then you want to get at least 120 grams of protein. 7 grams of protein in an ounce, that works out to, just over a pound a day. If you're not interested in doing the math like me, just aim for at least 4 to 6 ounces of protein at 3 meals a day. Or if you're doing intermittent fasting, make sure you're getting to 7 to 8 ounces of protein at 2 meals a day. Okay. So you want to optimize your protein, because that's going to improve your ability to build muscle. If you're lifting weights and doing those workouts and not optimizing your protein, good luck even putting on any muscle. And women, to give you an idea of the struggle, women put on at most half a pound of muscle per month, whereas men can put on 1 to 2 pounds of muscle per month. Women can put on about half a pound of muscle under ideal circumstances. It takes years to build muscle.
Yeah.
So the day in, day out intake of protein is essential. Okay. Number 2, my second meno law is to have your protein ratios higher than your carbs. So let's say that you are getting 120 grams of protein, aim for about 100 grams of carbs, more if you're lifting weights. Okay. But that ratio is really favorable. This is not based on research study. This is based on 27 years in practice. Just observational, right? I have people track. I have them log their macros. My patient portal has a wonderful app that's very similar to like Chronometer, or you could use MyFitnessPal, which is free. Just log your food for 3 days and see how much protein you're eating. If your carbs are higher than your protein, you're also going to really struggle to lose weight. You probably got some insulin resistance cooking there. You're not processing your carbs well. You could wear a continuous glucose monitor to also check, but just start with your food log, okay? And just say, hey, is my protein higher than my carbs? Because it's rare that this happens when you won't lose weight or see changes in your body composition. And number 3 is to have your carbs at night with your dinner. That is when you're actually the most insulin sensitive. That is also a great way to optimize and biohack your sleep, because it does jack up your serotonin and dopamine, but it also can spike up your insulin a little bit. And that insulin is antagonistic to cortisol. So when you get your insulin up, it tamps down cortisol. Same for if you're someone who's like, no, I prefer my carbs post-workout. Great. Make sure you're getting good carbs post-workout, also to tamp down your cortisol. But the other thing you can do, in terms of exercise and losing weight, is to actually exercise smarter, not harder. And women look at me like I'm nuts. So like, there is no way this is going to work. I'm like, look, what you're doing isn't working now, number 1. Number 2, I know you love your spin classes. Everyone bought a Peloton during the pandemic. We bought one too. But here's how to use it to your advantage is instead of doing these long rides in the morning, feeling great, and then crashing at 3 p.m., do a 20-minute ride in the morning and then a 20-minute weight class after that. Or strength train 2 to 3 times a week and do a lot of walking. Okay. A lot of the women I see, when I look at their Dutch test, their cortisol is either literally off the chart and then they crash at 3 p.m., or it's low during the day and then they're cortisol cowgirls at night, like really high at night.
And can't sleep.
Can't sleep. You cannot sleep at all. So lifestyle, adjusting your workouts will not be so taxing on your body. And then, of course, if supplements warrant, adrenal support. There's wonderful herbs that are called adaptogenic herbs that enable your body to handle stress better, help with support your blood sugar, and help with hormone balance, because people don't realize in menopause, your hormone production shifts from your ovaries to your adrenals. And if your adrenals are already taxed and exhausted, your hormones are you're really gonna struggle with optimization. So ashwagandha, schisandra, holy basil, magnolia bark, any of these can really, really help with sleep, with energy, mental focus. So all of those pieces combined, and I write a lot about in the book. And I do have protocols and like my, can access my protocols in my supplement section. You just head on to my website, but all of those are really, really beneficial.
Yeah, ladies, go back and listen to that 10 minutes about 5 times and get it in your brain. That is basically what I teach to the T, and it really gets people moving in the direction of weight loss. I think where a lot of women tend to, I don't want to say go wrong, but they're misguided, is they want to do the ketogenic diet. And I always say, well, the ketogenic diet means you're burning ketones for energy a lot of the time. Like we don't have to just use fat. Like if you want to do weight loss, if you're looking to utilize that ketogenic state as weight loss, we need to do higher protein because we need to take all of that energy. Like you can't do a lot of fat and carb and have so many energy resources there. Like we got to optimize that protein. And, usually just making that little shift, like you said, is enough to guide them toward losing body fat because they don't have the fat coming in as energy then. But that is so helpful. And I always, like, you'll see it all over my social. And when I work with people one-on-one, like aim for at least 100 grams of protein for women. And I give them that as a target to aim for first. And they struggle. They're like, I can't get that. Like, I'm getting about 60. And like, we need to keep working on it then. Like you need to know it's for feeling full. It's for muscle building. It's for muscle retention. And it's just, and I always tell my boys this too. I have 2 teenage boys. All my kids are all teenagers, but I have 2 teenage boys. They're kind of scrawny, like they're kind of late in the stage with maturing. I'm like, you do not build muscle with carbohydrate. Like, can I tell you that like 1,000 times? You don't build muscle with carbohydrate, like, because they want to eat the snacky stuff and drink the crappy drink that all those teenage boys want to revolve around. And I'm like, okay, we're not going to get super, I don't want to be crazy mom here, but at the same time, like, you have to understand the foundations of what you're building muscle mass with, what you're building hormones with. And if I can at least educate you with that and you understand it, then you can understand how to make shifts in your body. But yeah, so many gems that you said, like the higher protein. And I always say, like, that first meal coming off your fast, higher protein, lower carb. Not as in, you don't use the carbohydrates as well. You're just going to set yourself up for energy swings. So lots of golden nuggets in those last minutes.
And can we circle back to keto one more minute too? Absolutely. Keto works great. I don't know if you have found this. I've had a lot of women coming to me saying, keto really helped my hot flashes, which is true initially, and it can help the weight loss initially. But after about 3 months, your hormones wise up and your thyroid wises up and says, I don't have enough carbs to convert T4 to T3, the active form of thyroid hormone. So that's also a deal breaker. It's like, I have no problem with you doing keto if you want to short term, but long term, you do need to, at the very least, cycle your carbs off and on, because otherwise it's, the weight loss plateaus and or reverses again. So I'm a big believer in smart carbs, not no carbs. And I really don't have to go to extremes of keto too. I mean, you're probably like me, where the one thing I do agree with the Dietetic Association is, like, what we did learn in school was sustainability. Make it a realistic plan. Make it something that is livable and doable for you, and not just a diet, but a lifestyle. Again, totally cliched, but when you figure out, like, okay, I can stay lean, I can still have carbs as long as my protein's higher. And like every now and then, if my carbs go higher one day, well, then they can just go lower the next. And like really teaching people, hey, if it's an anniversary dinner or a holiday dinner, have a piece of dessert, keep your carbs low that day, do some weightlifting. There's so many ways to make this livable where you don't have to feel guilty. But like, you just know how to manage it and balance it. It's like balancing a checkbook, or balancing, I don't know, your calories and your grams of carbs and protein.
Yeah. And I like looking at the targets of keeping the carbs under the protein, because I always give my clients and students like that 100 grams of protein as a starting point. Like, let's try to hit that and keep your overall carbohydrates under 100. Depending on how metabolically ill you are, you can play around with that a little bit, and then let's carb up. You know, if people are still menstruating, we look at adding a couple of flex days in there as well, for just the reasons that you said, to support the progesterone, to support the thyroid hormones. But I like that target of keeping your carbs under your protein, because I think that it just gives one more thing, you know, way of thinking about that. And you and I, it sounds like we teach a lot of the same things. And I always tell people, I teach low carb. I don't teach no carb, but low carb, you know, a lot of people think, oh gosh, it's got to be below 30. And it's kind of sad, because really 100 grams of carbohydrates, very doable for just about anyone. But we're so used to eating 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrate in the standard American diet that it feels restrictive at the beginning. But it's just, once you get used to that target, I think it's very manageable, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and I was going to say, right, if you're getting someone whose protein is 100 and then they have to eat 80 grams of carbs, they're certainly going to lose weight. It's like hard not to lose weight on that. But yeah, and 100 grams of protein is a nice starting point. There was a really cool study done on Navy SEALs who were, put under, when are they not put under rigorous training, but put under rigorous training, and they had a calorie deficit, but their protein minimum threshold was 100 grams per day, and they were able to preserve muscle mass. They weren't able to build it, but they were able to preserve. So it is a nice starting point. And once people get in the groove, I mean, I've literally had women eating 170 grams of protein a day.
Wow.
They were working out a ton. These are tall women who weigh, 180 pounds. And I was like, okay, we're gonna, and it took them a while, but we did do it. So there's lots of ways to get
and it's so hard to overeat it, because you get full. It's like, you're not gonna eat 3 steaks like you would 3 pieces of cake. It's just like, it's so filling and satiating that it's hard to overdo it. Have you heard, I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast too, but I get people like giving me just pushing back on, oh, we can only absorb like 30 grams of protein at once. And I've heard, heard that refuted many times. And really, I think it's within like a 24-hour period that you can cycle that protein in the bloodstream, and it doesn't like go to waste. Like, have you heard that as well?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of myths around that. My protein guru is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. And I can't wait for her book to come out on this, but
yes, me too.
Yeah, 30 to 50 grams is the threshold. Usually if you're not absorbing protein, it means you've got some GI issues cooking, and you may need some digestive enzymes, because with an increase in protein, you do need a bit more digestive fire in this. But certainly it's not problematic. And again, most people get used to it. It's very hard to overdose on protein. It doesn't shut down your kidneys. I mean, unless you're in kidney failure and you're not on dialysis, but it's incredibly safe. The body does adapt to it. I wrote about that in my Cave Women Don't Get Fat book.
Yeah, that's another great resource, but I'm glad that you mentioned it. And it's a lot of digestive issues or low stomach acid, then it makes sense. You don't digest protein as well. So those are all excellent points. Well, a couple more questions and we'll close out, and you can tell us where to get your book. And I'm sure a lot of people are intrigued by that, but what are your overall thoughts on intermittent fasting? This podcast, we talk a lot about timed eating and intermittent fasting, there's so many misleading concepts floating around about that. Like, women can't fast, and if you have thyroid issues, you can't fast. But, what's your overall approach on that? And then kind of going along with that, do you suggest berberine at all for blood sugar issues or dysregulation?
Well, let me start with berberine because it's so funny. Berberine does double duty a lot of the times because a lot of people I treat have microbial overgrowth or dysbiosis. And so I use berberine to clean out, to clean out the dysbiosis. But a lot of times too, they have blood sugar issues. So I'm like, oh, double duty. And,
Yeah.
berberine's an incredible way to kill two birds with one stone. In terms of intermittent fasting, so when I wrote Cave Women Don't Get Fat, I did a lot of research on it. And of 73 studies I looked at, only 13 were done on women. And the research is really poor on women in general.
Yeah.
I'm sure you realize this, like I looked at tons of research studies in my undergrad to become a dietitian. And the studies were done on men and rats. And it's still that way today because women are much trickier to control. I think a great control group is naturally postmenopausal women. There's no monthly cycle to contend with.
Right.
That being said, so let's talk about, I'll call it my observational study, which is my own private practice. I've treated thousands of people over the years. What I observe is that, and again, I'm not attached to these results, I'm just simply reporting, is that women who do best on intermittent fasting who are cycling who are getting a monthly period, tend to do better the first 2 weeks of their cycle when they're the more insulin sensitive than the second 2 weeks of their cycle when they're more insulin resistant. Number two, menopausal women do great on intermittent fasting. And for someone who's new to fasting, I say start with just the simple 12-hour, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. It's a great starting window. That alone can make a huge difference in insulin sensitivity and fat loss and also gut healing. And as you evolve, I'm amazed at how women in postmenopause, and especially there's a lot of women in my practice who I can't get them to eat enough. So I'm like, fine. For those women, we can do 12 or 18-hour fasts, easy peasy, because they're basically doing that anyway. Or I like them to do the 5-2 method of fasting, where 5 days is just business as usual, normal caloric intake, and 2 days a week you have a 500-calorie meal. I usually recommend dinner because most people get through the day fine fasting anyway. So that's kind of, it's a great way to reset insulin receptors. Hello, this is your show. This is what you talk about all the time. Right? But it resets the insulin receptors. It controls hunger and cravings, actually. And certainly it really supports autophagy, which is cell-mediated healing, really. And for chronic health conditions like Lyme, Epstein-Barr, COVID, fasting can be a phenomenal tool to help your body repair itself, blood sugar issues. So
right.
Yeah, I would say my only advice is don't go straight into fasting if you're totally new to it. Build up to it. If you're really sick and dealing with a health condition, get through that first and then work on the fasting. But let's say you're pretty healthy overall. It's just that, you're dealing with the menopause, right? And some weight gain and just not feeling yourself and bloating. Then intermittent fasting works like a dream and really helps with weight loss.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the 5-2 method because I probably don't recommend that enough. And as an option, if somebody's feeling stuck, and I always say, if you're stuck, you got to stop doing the same thing every day. We got to switch something up. But that method with doing, like you said, business as usual, 5 days a week, and then 2 days, just, really kind of being very, very conservative on our intake and just one meal of about 500 calories, that's enough to throw your body into wait, what is happening here? But only for a couple days and not in a row. And then the next day it's business as usual. And your body's like, oh, okay, cool. This is manageable. So yeah, I'm glad that you threw that in as an option. But yeah, so See You Later Ovulators, your newest book. Anything else that you want us to know about that book? And then where we can find you and all your resources.
Yeah. The only thing I will say is that, ladies, you do not have to wait until you're fully in menopause to start bringing hormones in. If you do your Dutch or do your GI map. You work with a functional medicine dietitian or doctor, you know, or a nurse practitioner or naturopathic physician, whoever can prescribe you hormones, right? If you need them, that's really key. And the earlier you bring them in, the better the clinical outcomes for preventing bone loss, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's or memory loss, cognitive changes. So try to bring them in early to also smooth out the bumps of the symptoms that you can get through all the way through menopause and beyond. And as you'll read in the book, you know, I collected stories from women. I call them the menopause diaries, and you know, interviewed women well into their 70s who've been using hormones for 20 years and are like, I'm never going to stop, and this works for me. And it can, and for those of you who have risks of cancer or contraindications for hormones, I have absolutely other alternatives that you can do with nutrients and lifestyle. But the nice thing is, whether you have cancer or risk for cancer or don't, you know, vaginal estrogen is also a great way to prevent atrophy, and it stays extremely localized. It does not travel to the bloodstream. It's just supporting that collagen production. But again, if you're like, nope, I won't even do that, there's laser therapies. You know, there's so many options that you can use in addition to support your menopause. So if you want to find me, I'm on Instagram at Gorgeous Esther. And that is alluding to my first book, Eat, Drink, and Be Gorgeous. So Gorgeous Esther. And then you can also, if you want to buy my book and you want some added bonuses, please go to estherblum.com/menopause. And that is going to gift you with my downloadable Happy Hormone Cocktail Guide, as well as a VIP ticket to my virtual live event in February of 2023.
Love that. And I'm glad that you did bring up, I meant to ask you, like, who's a good candidate for hormone replenishment therapy? So you kind of answered that in the last couple of minutes. And yeah, we don't need to be afraid of it. I think, you know, the Women's Health Initiative study, it really just guided so many women and practitioners and those who could be helping women out with hormone replenishment. I like how you say hormone replenishment instead of hormone replacement, because that's really what we're doing, is we're just replenishing the hormones back to levels where we feel good and we can function like we did when we had higher levels of female hormones. So very, very helpful. I think your book, I think every woman should read it, even those who are still in their menstruating years, and just to understand, you know, the life cycle of women and their menstrual cycles. And, you know, I didn't know a whole lot about mine until probably the last 5 years after I've had kids, and all about it. But yes, it's been an honor and very fun to have you on the show today. We are very blessed to have you share your knowledge with us, and blessed to have you out in the field teaching people what you teach, and to have the wonderful resources available to us. If we're not, you know, if we're not able to work with you directly, we can read all your knowledge in one book. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. What a gift.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. You're still recording?
Yes.